Hello everyone, I'm Ben Moffat. I'm a Programme and Evaluation Lead for VAWG at YEF. Thank you very much for joining us on a hot and sunny Wednesday morning to learn about Objective 1 of the VAWG Prevention Programme, which is all about improving the provision of relationship, sex and health education in secondary schools. Today we'll take you through who we are at the Youth Endowment Fund, our research on violence against women and girls, the cross-governmental strategy on violence against women and girls and where this work fits in. And then we'll take you in depth into the objective itself, what the application and assessment process will look like for delivery partners, and then also a bit about what the evaluation design will likely look like. And then we want to make sure that we've got enough time for questions and answers at the end. So we'll try and reserve around 45 minutes for that. We're going to move at a fairly quick pace, but these slides and a recording of today's webinar will be available on the YEF website over the coming few days. So don't worry if you miss anything. And just to say, you can start adding questions for Q&A at any time. And you can also react to other people's questions. So do use that function if someone's asked a question that you would like the response to. Lovely. So I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Jess, who's going to tell you a bit more about who we are.
Thanks, Ben, and hi, everybody. Jess Southgate. I'm the Violence Against Girls and Young Women Lead at the Youth Endowment Fund. And I'm just going to talk you through a little bit about who we are and why we're focusing on this space. So at YEF, our focus is on preventing children and young people from becoming involved in violence. And as a What Works Centre, we aim to improve the way that evidence is used and shared in high quality decision making to support more effective services. And our mission is to find what works and to put that movement into practice. So if you look at our strategy, you can see how we do this. So firstly, we fund work that helps understand the scale of violence affecting children and young people. So that includes evaluation, systematic reviews, research to address evidence gaps, and data analysis, as well as evaluations, which was what we'll be talking about today. When we find what works, we then share this through things like our toolkit, which is on our website of violence prevention approaches, and practice and system guidance. And with that evidence, then we then work for change to put that learning into practice by building awareness and appetite for the evidence and supporting delivery organisations and system leaders to put those recommendations into practice. We work across what we describe as 7 essential sectors, which you can see on the left here, and violence against women and girls, of course, cuts across all of these and has a role to play in preventing it. However, for this call today, we're focusing on the really important role that education can play in preventing VAWG. So moving on to think about YEF's role in this space, this funding round forms part of a wider programme of YEF funding evaluation and research over the next few years on what works to prevent and respond to violence against girls and young women. Part of that is to understand the scale as it affects children and young people. We run a survey called the Children Vulnerability and Violence Survey, which is the largest household survey of young people's experiences of violence. It surveys around 11,000 young people, and we know from that around half of teenagers who've been in relationships have either experienced or perpetrated relationship abuse. That's about 4% of all teenage children in England and Wales. We also know from police data that the percentage of those offences against children, child sexual abuse and exploitation offences, around half of those are now young people, with sexual offences amongst children having risen sharply. Tech has obviously changed that picture rapidly, so around 41% of those offences involve indecent images, often self-generated. So these are peer-on-peer cases of young people who are often known to one another. We've also seen a significant rise in children's exposure to this kind of content online. So 39% of children in our survey last year said that they had seen material on social media that encouraged violence against women and girls, and that was an increase from the year before. 70% had seen real-world violence online, of which a quarter was sexually violent content. And this matters because we know that children who are exposed to sexual violence, both online and in person, are more likely to see it as acceptable, and those who see it as acceptable are more likely to use that harm themselves. And we know from professionals, including teachers, that these issues are commonplace in the young people that they're working with. So in another teacher tap survey that YAF commissioned of around 5,000 secondary school teachers, 13% said that in the last term alone, they reported a child having sexually assaulted another child. So this is just one part of YAF's role in understanding more about the picture. So I'm just going to give you a bit of a snapshot of what's coming up for us beyond this work over the next 18 months. We're continuing to understand more about the prevalence and the scale through our CVV survey, which we will publish later this year with additional data about online harms and teenage relationship abuse. We are building evidence base around what's happening in practice in terms of responding and identifying VAWG amongst young people, as well as carrying out more secondary data analysis, which will understand more about the scale and the prevalence of VAWG amongst children and young people. We'll be taking forward new approaches as part of our violence prevention toolkit, for example, around universal approaches to prevent gender-based violence and tech-facilitated gender-based violence prevention. And with all of that evidence, we're going to be pulling that together into guidance to support system leaders to change this picture. Importantly, we are being informed by expertise, both from the front line through VAWG associates and also through our youth advisory board, who have a particular subgroup who are working with us on these issues. So moving on then to this particular programme, this is the VAWG prevention programme through which we aim to fund and evaluate work across these two objectives. So the first that we're talking about today is preventative work with universal groups of young people to promote healthy and respectful relationship education. We will also shortly be publishing Objective 2, which you can see here is about responding to inappropriate and problematic harmful behaviours in education. So that's targeted work for children aged 11 to 17. And we will be publishing that in early July. So do please have a look out on our website for that when that comes up. So today we're just focusing in on Objective 1. And the reason that we're interested in this is that we know adolescence is, of course, a critical period for prevention work. This is a critical time when relationship norms and behaviours are being formed. And schools are, of course, critical spaces for supporting young people to develop the skills and confidence to build healthy, equal and respectful relationships. We know that quality relationships, sex and education, health education builds communication skills and promotes those healthy norms. And of course, the new guidance effective from September this year really recognises those challenges and introduces a stronger focus on VAWG prevention, misogyny and some of the emerging risks associated with technology. However, we also know that many teachers lack the confidence to deliver this education and many don't feel adequately trained. Therefore, with the new curriculum coming, this is a great time to be understanding more about what can be done to improve the delivery of RSHE, both through improving teacher training and through specialist provision by external providers. So I'm just going to touch now on what the evidence tells us about healthy relationships, education, what we know and what we don't know, and how this has motivated this funding for. So part of YAF's role that I mentioned at the start is collating the best available UK and international evidence on violence prevention through our toolkit, where we have around 40 approaches. One of these is relationship violence prevention lessons and activities. And we know from this that these approaches can have a positive impact on reducing VAWG. These are typically activities delivered by teachers or external facilitators that aim to reduce violence between young people in intimate relationships. That work challenges harmful norms, builds social and emotional skills, and improves early identification of warning signs. And the evidence suggests that it can reduce all types of dating and relationship violence, including emotional, physical, sexual, and online abuse. We know that there are some best bets from the evidence that we have. So young people find sessions more engaging when there's lots of interaction, when facilitators have good knowledge and confidence in their delivery, when there's buy-in from schools and programmes are able to adapt sessions to flex to the time and space available, when it's tailored to content and responds to age and need, and when there's opportunity to embed reflective sessions and group discussion to maximise impact. However, there's also lots that we don't know, and that's a core ambition of this funding, is to strengthen understanding of what works in this space. So we're really looking to support a diverse array of interventions to build that evidence about which interventions are most effective and how they're best delivered. So we have good confidence in the international evidence. However, there's a very limited UK evidence base. So most of the interventions that went into the toolkit strand I mentioned are from North America. And whilst there's promising early UK studies, more research is needed to understand how those can translate to the British context. We know that there's a wide variation in delivery models, but we don't know what formats or interventions are most effective. We don't know what the minimum dosage is, so the ideal number of sessions to have the best effect. And this is a key gap for schools where we know it can be very challenging to make space to deliver this work. We also don't know whether training teachers internally and embedding that into the curriculum or external providers are more effective. We know much less about what the core underlying mechanisms are by which change is achieved, what is most effective for children from minoritized backgrounds, and also what can ensure the sustainability of effective intervention. So this is just some of the way that we're thinking about how we want to go about focusing in this strand. That's in a nutshell where we are and our rationale for the funding call. And I'm now going to hand over to Jo, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the cross-government violence against women and girls strategy.
Hello everyone, I am Jo Wilson from the Department for Education. I'm assuming that people can hear me. So as some of you will be aware, in December of 2025, we published the Freedom from Violence and Abuse Across Government Strategy to Build a Safer Society for Women and Girls. So this is a significant VAWG strategy. The government announced as part of their 2024 manifesto that the aim was to halve violence against women and girls within the next decade, and this strategy is a significant part of that. I should say that the plan is that there will be updates to this strategy once a year, with the first one scheduled in this December, where we will be listing some of the progress we've made and where we can go further. One of the core aspects of the strategy, as Jess sort of mentioned, is the role that prevention plays, recognizing that violence is not innate, misogyny is not innate, and that we can do more to tackle this. We're aware that, for example, children make up only 20% of the population, but are victims of 40% of all sexual offences recorded by police. I'm sure many of you were on the call will have been dealing with more and more sort of safeguarding incidents. There have been some really horrific cases in the news, and DFE see ourselves as playing the core role in prevention, given that we have the responsibility for the education of our young people in England. There are 259 commitments within the strategy, of which DFE owns 18 of them. But one of our primary commitments is to launch these pilots into schools to look at how best to teach this, to tackle this, how best we can support teachers. We were really pleased to be working with YEF on these 3 pilots because we felt that we needed one organisation to work across all 3, and we needed that expertise. There was some talk of doing this in-house, and I'm very glad it's not me, but also YEF have a real range of expertise. They're a well-established What Works centre, and we've seen the previous result. In fact, I spent quite a lot of my time quoting YEF reports. So really excited to be working with them on this. Alongside this, I should say, over the next 3 years, we're spending £50 million supporting social workers, including training, not only increasing the number of social workers we have, but training them, because we do recognise that schools can't do this alone and that teachers are being required to pick up more and more. So that's something else we're doing. We've also launched over the next 3 years £2.4 billion for the Families First hubs, which again we think will support more families who are going through challenging circumstances. But we also recognise that a lot of that work is focused on support rather than prevention, which is why we're excited about the YEF work. I'm conscious there are quite a few stakeholders on this call who have probably met me before or have further questions about the government's strategy and about DFE. So I'm happy to take questions at the end or happy to arrange a separate call. But today I'm here to talk about the pilots, which I'll be working with YEF on and which I'm really excited about. I'll hand back over to you, Jess, I think.
Thanks, Jo. So I'm going to talk a bit more about Objective 1 and what we're looking to fund. So as my colleagues have mentioned, Objective 1 is all about promoting and encouraging healthy relationship education in secondary school settings. And under this objective, we're looking to fund essentially two types of delivery models. The first type, or the first strand, is focused on building school capacity internally. And by this, we mean teacher training and workforce development. So we're looking mostly for programs that aim to equip school staff with the knowledge, confidence, practical skills to deliver high quality RSHE and healthy relationship education in line with the new RSHE curriculum. So in practice, this means training that goes beyond helping teachers understand the actual content. The training should also help staff develop the skills and confidence to actually teach these topics effectively, facilitate meaningful discussions, and actually support teachers to actually manage sensitive or challenging conversations around issues such as relationship, consent, online safety. While teacher training is the kind of primary focus of this strand, we're also open to programs that may include some wider whole school components, such as elements that might strengthen school leadership, improve school culture, improve school practices. We recognise that whole school approaches can play a role in creating the conditions for high quality implementation and actually help reinforce and sustain the impact of teacher training. That said, it's important to recognise that the whole school element, it should remain as a supporting component of the programme rather than the main focus, because the main focus of the strand is still focused on teacher training, but there are additional supplements you can include as part of your model. So if your organisation primarily supports teachers through RSHE training, coaching, mentoring, professional development, this is probably a strand that's more relevant for you. On the other hand, we've got another strand that's more focused on direct delivery to pupils. So this is more for organisations that actually go into schools and deliver the sessions directly to pupils. So for this strand, we'd probably expect the content that you deliver is also aligned with the new curriculum, and that we typically expect programmes to be delivered for at least 4 or more sessions. The exact number of sessions and the length of delivery will obviously vary depending on your own model. Some programs may run for 5 weeks, some may run for a term or 2 terms. I think what's important here is that the content that, I think it's important here that as part of your application, you explain why you've chosen that length of delivery and why you believe it's enough to actually achieve a meaningful impact. It's probably also worth keeping in mind that the content that you plan to deliver actually does complement and reinforce the school's existing RSHE provision, rather than actually replacing or duplicating what's already been delivered. So please do keep that in mind. If you are thinking about applying for Strand 2, we'd also encourage you to think maybe more about what added value your organisation brings. So what expertise, what experience, what approach can you offer to schools that they may not otherwise provide themselves? And I think just maybe outlining that in your application will help really strengthen your proposal and help us understand what added value you would bring to that school. So that's broadly what the 2 strands are focused on. Generally, we'd expect you to apply for one or the other, as opposed to kind of proposing on a model that has both elements. I appreciate some schools obviously do work across both strands, so please have a think through what approach, what strand fits more. So what you're hoping to offer, and you're more than welcome to apply for kind of both strands, but keep that as 2 separate applications. So moving on to the alignment with the new curriculum. So as my colleagues have mentioned, whether you're applying for Strand 1 or Strand 2, your intervention to really support the delivery of relevant healthy relationship education within the new guidance. And this is because Objective 1 is not just supporting the government's VAWG strategy, particularly in prevention, we're also supporting schools to actually deliver the new RSHE curriculum, which comes into effect September for all secondary schools. So we've highlighted some examples of relevant topics, but I'll strongly encourage all applicants to actually read through the updated guidance in full to see what added content, what additional content has been added. It's probably important to note that for your individual intervention, we don't expect you to cover every topic in the new guidance. we obviously recognise that organisations have their own particular areas of expertise, and that we're happy for your kind of application to focus on specific themes or contents within the new guidance. So if you're an organisation that mainly focuses on online harm and you provide delivery to students on online harm or online safety, we're happy for you to focus that as part of your application, provided that it aligns with the new curriculum and the added content in there. I think that's it for me. I'll pass over to Ben.
Thank you, Fidosa. So for this objective, we're looking for interventions that are ready to evaluate through an efficacy study, which is a kind of impact evaluation which assesses how well a program works and whether the intended benefits and results are being achieved. And we anticipate that those efficacy studies will follow what's called a cluster randomized control trial design. But my colleague Phil will talk a bit more about this later. So in order to ensure that the interventions we select are ready for an efficacy study and are suitable for this objective, we're looking for interventions that have a few different key characteristics. So we're looking for interventions which have a really clear theory of change, so a strong theory about why the intervention will achieve the desired outcomes, and which ideally is backed up by available evidence. That the intervention's quite well manualized, and that can be delivered with consistency between schools, so that we're not running a program across 10 schools and delivering 10 different interventions under the same label, and that they demonstrate good alignment with the new RSHE curriculum and the cross-governmental strategy on VAWG. And as Jess mentioned earlier, we're looking for interventions that are informed by the best available evidence around implementation. So for strand 2, that would be things like delivering at least 4 sessions, delivered by specialists and using interactive formats, but also that an evaluation of the intervention would help us to address a key evidence gap. So across the portfolio, we're looking to commission programs which use a range of formats and a range of kind of how many sessions they deliver and that kind of thing. We also want to ensure that anyone we do take through can demonstrate their organisational readiness for meeting the requirements of an efficacy study. So that includes things like prior experience of delivering the programme, and that they can meet the scale and requirements of the strand. So how many schools that each partner needs to deliver to will be finalised during co-design, but we expect that to be in the range of requiring delivery to around 20 to 30 schools within the time available, depending on the strand. So while the scale of delivery required for an efficacy study can be quite significant, we don't want that to discourage smaller organisations from applying. We really want these studies to get the maximum benefit from the expertise available in the sector, whether that's through larger organisations or smaller bodies, including those run by and for people from minority, ethnic or cultural backgrounds. So if you're joining this webinar and you're from a smaller organisation and you wouldn't be able to meet that scaling requirement just by yourself, then please do consider applying in partnership with others. And if you do apply in partnership, your application won't be disadvantaged during the assessment process, but you should make sure that you do a few things. Please identify a clear lead organisation to act as a main point of contact for YEF and for the evaluator. Please set out the role and expertise of each partner and how the range of perspectives across the partnership enhance the implementation of the programme. We'd expect that partnerships are built on existing relationships and networks as well, with quite established ways of working, just due to the time constraints of this work and how quickly we need to move proposals through the various stages. We wouldn't expect that those relationships could be built from scratch in the time available, and also that all the partners are delivering a consistent shared intervention model. There might be a little bit of room for kind of flexibility and a bit of variation in delivery between partners within one proposal, but that should be kind of clearly described and parametered. So I also want to take a moment to just talk about our approach to equity at YEF. So we know that violence and harmful behaviours don't affect all children equally. Young people from marginalised backgrounds, including those facing structural inequalities, are more likely to experience harm and are less likely to receive appropriate support. So that underpins why equity is a real core principle of the work that we do at YEF, and particularly for this objective as well. So this objective supports universal provision of programmes, so we wouldn't expect that programmes target specific children and young people and that they'd largely be delivered to a full class or year group or school, although we are open to funded programmes which deliver only to children and young people of a specific gender, or where the programmes deliver separately to boys and girls, for example. But we would encourage delivery models to be quite responsive to various needs of children and young people. So that includes considering things like gender differences, the experiences of Black, Asian and minoritized young people, and the experiences of young people with special educational needs and disabilities. We're looking for interventions which consider the needs of different children and young people and how a young person might respond differently to content depending on their background. We also recognise that there might be many different cultural perspectives around RSHE in England, and we'd ask applicants to demonstrate how they respond appropriately to challenges to their content while maintaining fidelity to their statutory curriculum. And equity is also embedded in our decision-making criteria as well. We think about it when we're assessing the design of the intervention, so who it's designed for, how inclusive the content is, and also in the delivery of the content, so how accessible is it for different children and young people, and have different engagement strategies being considered. And we particularly welcome proposals from organisations which are led by women and from organisations that are led by Black, Asian and other racially minoritized leaders. And I also want to emphasise that we really do see this objective as a collaborative learning process. We want to work with the funded partners to identify the best bets around implementation in quite an ongoing way and disseminate ongoing learning with the aim of improving practice and policy around violence against women and girls, both following the objective, but also we want to release some kind of interim outputs between now and 2029 so that we're making best use of interim learning. And we also want to, when available and where appropriate, kind of source wider expertise for our partners, such as through Race Equity Associates, to help them improve their practice in an ongoing way. And we'll look for opportunities to bring partners together throughout the objective, so we can establish a bit of a network of fellow travellers who are all looking to improve RSHE provision in England. So by the end of the evaluation, in addition to the findings of the impact evaluation, we really hope that partners end with a better understanding of how their intervention works, how, under what circumstances and for whom. And we hope that that should help you to hone your practice thereafter, after the end of the YEF funded delivery period. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the application process, but I won't go into too much depth just because a lot of this will be available in the guidance. But applications are now open for Objective 1 and will close on Monday, the 27th of July at 9 AM. Please do submit your applications before then because we can't consider any proposals which are submitted after that deadline. And then we'll shortlist a series of proposals for interview, which will take place between the 9th and 20th of August. That will be our opportunity to learn more about your organisation and intervention, but also your opportunity to ask us any questions about what YEF funding or the evaluation design is likely to look like. And we request that applicants please ensure they've got quite good availability during within that window, so 9th to the 20th of August. From there, we'll embark on our internal decision-making a bit about which projects we'd like to advance the co-design and then recommend a slate to our Grants and Evaluation Committee, or GECO, who have the final say in our funding decisions. We anticipate that they will meet to do this in late September. And at the same time, we'll match projects with an evaluator from our panel of evaluators. And those projects that are approved by GECO will then advance into co-design, which will take place between October and November of this year. That'll be led by the evaluator with a key role for the delivery partner and supported by YEF. And that'll be where partners develop a final proposal for delivering and evaluating the intervention. And we'll coordinate a budget to cover the time that's dedicated by partners towards co-design up to a maximum value of £20,000 per proposal. And then we'll review the final proposal in December and decide whether to progress to trial. I just flagged that co-design is still seen as part of our application process, and so we can't guarantee that proposals which make it to that stage will then make it to trial. But we'll work with you very closely during that period so that you understand the expectations on your delivery and evaluation design. And then the plan is to advance into setup in the beginning of 2027 for those successful projects. And if you want to access the application materials, please do go to the VAWG Prevention Programme Objective 1 page of our website and submit your completed application form and indicative budget and send those to the grants inbox no later than 9 AM on Monday, the 27th of July. And just to flag that we have separate application forms depending on what strand you're applying for, so please make sure that you're completing the right one. And then I'll briefly take you through the assessment criteria so you can understand the basis on which decisions are being made. When we come to review your application, we'll be looking to see that there's a suitable outcome. So assessing whether the project outcomes match this objective's aims and how likely it is that delivery within the available parameters of this objective can achieve those outcomes. That you're able to engage children, young people, and school staff depending on the intervention. So who you plan to work with, how you'll engage them, and what your experience is working with this cohort. That you're able to deliver at the scale likely required of the evaluation, and that you're drawing on existing evidence where available for your decisions around content and implementation. And then, as we've discussed, we'll be looking to see that the intervention is valuable and ready for an efficacy study. And finally, that it's likely to lead to change if it's proven effective. So a core part of YEF's strategy is encouraging the scaling of effective interventions. So we'll assess whether the intervention is likely to be adopted by schools outside of a YEF-funded trial, and that it fits with the cross-governmental strategy on VAWG and wider policy trends as well. Okay, I'm going to hand over now to Phil, who's going to talk a bit about the evaluation design.
Thanks, Ben. I'm going to talk about evaluation at YEF. So YEF has been funding evaluations for about the last 7 years. We're currently evaluating 90 different interventions. Most of those are RCT impact evaluations. 30 of them are pilots for RCT impact evaluations, and 13 are feasibility studies. So there's actually a huge number of studies. I believe it's the biggest collection of studies ever funded in the UK. So across the 7 sectors the organisation works in, the majority of these studies will focus on the education, youth and children's services sectors. We cover the gamut between primary, secondary and tertiary cohorts, with quite a lot in the secondary cohort, quite a lot in the tertiary cohort, and a bit less in the primary cohort. We currently have 2 projects running within the VAWG space, and the London Sexual Violence Project, which is run by Brook Young People, evaluated by University of Birmingham. This is working in 60 schools in London, working with Year 9 students, delivering 4 structured sessions for students and 1 staff session, aiming to change attitudes towards relationships and dating-based violence. Second project is called STEPS, delivered by the Salford Foundation around Birmingham, around Greater Manchester, evaluated by Cordis Bright. This is aimed at 11 to 14-year-old boys, running 6 sessions in the school, aiming to change harmful behaviours and prevent GBV violence. This project, compared to the other one, this project is run on a year group basis, and year groups are randomised between the group that received the project and the group that they're compared to. Both of these are efficacy studies and will be published. The results will be published in 2029. Thanks, Dosa. For YEF, there's 2 key components of an evaluation. There's a project which shows promise, and there's the independent evaluation. These 2 parts are seen as equal halves of the whole. So there's no part of a project implementation which isn't part of an evaluation, for example. So the purpose of the evaluation is really to learn. So to learn what works, what the outcomes are, what's impactful, who's that most impactful, why, for, how does it work, what the mechanisms of change, when do you best intervene. We want to know what the outcomes are. We want to make sure projects aren't harmful. We want to support grantees to learn about the implementation of your projects so that you can improve that. We want to add to the UK and the international evidence base, and ultimately we want to see some changes for young people. Thanks. We have 3 core principles that underpin all of YEF's evaluations. So we aim for robustness, reliability and rigorousness in our studies, and we do that through a number of mechanisms. So the first is really using randomized designs. That means you can be a school or a group of young people can be randomly assigned to the project or randomly assigned not to the project. And there's that comparison which gives the study some robustness. We always include a implementation and process evaluation. That's a quantitative review of the implementation of the project and the context around that. And we also collect cost information. We always use pre-validated measurement tools. So we don't expect organizations to develop new ways to measure the achievements of their projects. Rather, we rely on proven, validated tools, and there's a number that are out there and suitable for these projects. And overall, we aim for a rigorous approach to our evaluations so that the lessons that are learned and the impact findings which are reported are credible, they're not biased, that decisions can be made on those findings, and that through the data archive, which is the long-term house for the results of the evaluation, through that data archive, we can carry out some long-term analysis. So what type of evaluation are we interested in this funding call? So we are interested in efficacy impact studies. So an efficacy impact study is a study which determines if your intervention works, if it produces the outcomes that you expect it to produce. And a key component of this type of study is the randomized design. In other calls we might launch later, we might focus more on feasibility studies or pilot studies, but this call is focused very much on efficacy impact studies because we believe that the number of interventions that are out there are at a mature level at which we can look at high level impact. Thanks. I wanted to give a quick example of the scale that might be required for a RCT impact study. And I put up here a scale, an example of a school randomized study that might need 60 schools for the study overall, of which 30 schools would be allocated, that's randomly allocated, to receive the project, receive the intervention, and 30 schools would be allocated to the control group carrying out business as usual. And the outcomes in these two groups is what's compared together. We will match you with an evaluation team that's drawn from our VAWG evaluator panel. So these are evaluation experts who are part of our normal EF evaluation panel. They conduct a lot of evaluations with us. They're very used to working with delivery partners. And we're picking people or teams that are have experience of VAWG programs and evaluation of VAWG projects. So our aim is to match your organization, your project with an evaluator. As we recommend our projects, the projects through to our grants and evaluation committee, we make the approvals for the project. If your project is approved, you would then move on to the co-design stage with the assigned evaluator to finalize the evaluation design. And this is just a repetition of the slide with the process on. So particularly we're talking about that. I was just talking about the evaluator matched orange square at the end of the stage 1 assessment. Thanks. And finally, I wanted to share a few reflections on what might be different in terms of running your project as part of an impact evaluation compared to as part of action research or just implementing your project outside of the world of research evaluation. There's a couple of key differences it's good to be aware of. The first is that the implementation of the project probably needs to run at quite a lot larger scale than you might be used to. So that's required in order to have robustness of findings at the end. The second is that more or less the project the delivery model is fixed at the start of the study. You can't modify it like you can in iterative learning processes. It's fixed at the start, and the consistency of delivery is important, and adherence to the timetable which is planned at the beginning. The reason for this is that this means that when we come to compare the effects of your project against the effects of business as usual, there's a robustness in that comparison because the project delivery hasn't changed. Thank you. I think I'm going to hand over to Fidosa for Q&A.
Great, thanks, Bill. Okay, I think we're ahead of schedule, so this is great. So just a few pointers about the Q&A session. This webinar is focused on objective 1, so please try to keep your questions relevant to that objective. We're planning a separate webinar in July for objective 2, so we'll be able to answer all those questions then. And I'm conscious we've got Joe on the call who's representing DFE, so if you do have any questions, Please do try to keep them limited because I think we want to focus on objective 1, but I'm sure Joe will be happy to sort of answer some questions if they do arise. Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen. Feel free to add your questions to the Q&A function, but I'm just going to go in order. I think some questions have already been answered. Okay. A question from Lucy. So Strand 2 expects delivery in around 20 to 30 secondary schools to 1 or more year groups. Depending on the schools selected for the programme, the resulting number of children will vary dramatically due to the size of the year group. Given the schools chosen for delivery is randomised, how will providers be informed enough to be able to budget for enough staffing capacity? Okay, I do understand the question, but Ben, do you think you're able to answer that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of the difference, the variance in kind of school sizes and year group sizes, that is a really good flag and something that we should bear in mind. Without getting too technical, when you're running trials like this, which are cluster trials, it tends to be the number of clusters, in this case, the number of schools or year groups or classes that you randomize, which is the most important thing to think about when you're thinking about scaling, rather than the number of children and young people within each of those buckets. But to answer the second part of your question as well, so at this stage, we're just asking people to provide indicative budgets of how much they think they'll need to deliver their intervention within the parameters that we have available. And then during co-design, when the actual scale of your delivery is finalized, that is when you'll provide another budget scaling to whatever the more final delivery extension is. So for now, we're just asking you to kind of, if you think you're applying to deliver to 20 schools or 30 schools, provide the budget that you think you'll need to do that. And then later down the line, there can be some refinement in advance of submitting your final proposal in December.
Thanks, Ben. I hope that answered your question, Lucy. If you do come back if you want further clarity. A question from Becky. Can you repeat the stage 1 application deadline? So the deadline is Monday, 27th July, 9 AM. Please do submit your application to our grant email address. A question from Mara. We ran a VAWG prevention programme. It was delivered in the past with a whole class approach, which we later discovered did not actually see as much impact as delivered to a small group of boys and young men with risk factors for becoming victims of perpetrators. We saw much more impact changing our delivery to this small group approach. Will this be considered, or would we need to go back to a whole school approach?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. So it's a really good question. So for this objective 1, we're focusing on what's called like universal or non-targeted provision of services. So that's delivering to an entire year group, classroom or school. But we will be launching our second objective very shortly, and that'll be more about the kind of targeted provision that you're referring to there. So that would be for interventions which are identifying young people based on risk factors around their inappropriate or problematic attitudes and behaviors around things like gender, relationships. And certainly as an organization where we're very interested in learning about whether the universal provision or the targeted provision is most useful. But if you'd like to apply with that targeted program, please do check back on our website. We're due to launch that on Monday, the 6th of July.
Thanks, Ben. Hope that answered your question, Laura. Another question. Currently, we're running a small group of 6 children. Would that be suitable, or is it for a whole class? Probably expect the latter, but yeah, Ben, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Yeah, so we probably expect that the provision of the program would be to the full class or year group or school. Whether the format of that means separating people into small groups within a classroom, for example, and delivering to 6 at a time, I think we'd be open to receiving a proposal along those lines. But we wouldn't expect for this objective that there's any targeting. So you wouldn't go to a teacher and ask them to identify, say, the young people within their class that would most benefit from this program and only deliver to them. It should really be a universal provision.
Thanks, Ben. Another question from Ella. I have a question about Strand 2 and the requirements related to previous delivery and readiness for impact. We have delivered and tested intervention that is very similar to the one we're proposing for this call. But we would be developing and manualizing a specific intervention that draws on that existing work. How important is it that the intervention proposed has already been delivered and tested in its current form? Would evidence from closely related interventions be suitable, or is prior testing of the specific intervention required? Yeah, to answer that, Ben or Phil?
Sure, I can jump in and then maybe Phil, please do add to what I say. It's a really good question. I think for this objective, we're really looking for interventions that are ready for an efficacy study. And so to clear that bar, we really expect interventions that are quite well, that have been delivered previously, that are quite well manualized. But if it's an intervention that's drawing on, say, like synthesizing elements of 2 different programs that you've already delivered, I think we could definitely consider that. We just have to think about it on a case-by-case basis in terms of how difficult it might be for you to then synthesize those elements and then test the acceptability with schools and things like that in advance of an impact evaluation, the requirements of which are quite extensive, as we've heard on the webinar thus far. So I'm sorry there wasn't a very clear yes or no answer to that, but I hope that kind of helps guide your decision about what program to apply with. Phil, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's kind of correct, that we would expect the vast majority of the mechanisms to have been tried and tested. It might not be 100% what you end up with, but there isn't a huge amount of time in the code design to do that sort of further development work. So we're expecting something to be fairly solid, but not 100%.
Great, thanks. Got another question. So we usually run a group or a course for 10 to 12 weeks, which is a term. So we would usually do 3 per year. How would we do 20 to 30? So I think the 20 to 30 refers to the schools. So if you're delivering to across 20 schools, that would be 3 groups per school. So that would be about 60 programs in a year. That's how I would understand it. Ben.
Thanks, Firoza. I might have misread the question, but if what you're asking is basically like how could you be expected to scale to the requirements of an efficacy study, I think we can be really honest that the requirements of an impact evaluation are quite extensive, and we've heard that the scaling requirement of 20 to 30 schools is maybe beyond some providers by themselves. If you are delivering an intervention that's that length, we encourage you to consider whether you could scale up your delivery, kind of like recruit the staff required in order to deliver within the available parameters of this objective. And if that's difficult within your own organization, to consider applying in partnership with others. But yes, we do completely recognize that the requirements of an efficacy study is quite a high bar to clear. Thanks, Firoza.
Thanks. Sorry, so many questions coming through. I lost track of where I am. Chris, is there any guidance on which geographical area to work with? We're considering working with a few different UK locations.
So the delivery for this objective is limited only to England. So we wouldn't be able to accept any proposals for delivery to Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland. In terms of whether you might want to think about focusing on a regional reach or a national reach across England, we'd be very open to partners proposing that themselves in terms of their own existing networks. I think we definitely consider applications for programs which have really strong regional networks and is very well established within their area, but we'd also accept applications for from organizations which have a very national reach. When we're expecting to fund several projects throughout this objective, so when we go into the later stages of co-design and into setup in late 2026, early 2027, then we'll try and work across partners to make sure that everyone's kind of, all the different partners are trying to target different schools and maybe slightly different areas as well. But we'll be able to kind of work a bit more on that when we know a bit more about which specific partners we're looking to fund.
Thanks, Ben. A question from Matt. Will successful organizations be responsible for recruiting the 30 schools who who will not, I guess, who will be part of the control group? Phil or Ben?
Sure. I believe that mostly it's the role of the evaluator to help in the recruitment, but I think in practice it requires a bit of work from both sides. So there would be some support to the evaluators in recruiting those control schools.
And I should also just pop in to say DFE is highly familiar with having to recruit schools for things, and you'd be surprised how quickly people will answer when they see an email has come from DFE. So we will also be offering support to organisations through VAWG.
Thanks, Joe. Kimberly, are alternative education settings within scope?
Yes, they are. Particularly, we're interested in schools which are specialist schools for providing education to those with special educational needs and disabilities. The only thing that you might want to think about if it is a particularly specialist program delivering to, say, alternative provision is how you'll meet that scaling requirement, because that might be quite extensive. But we'd be open to proposals which are a combination of mainstream secondary schools and alternative provision. I might just double check with everyone else on this call that they've got that same understanding.
I might just come in on that. I know we discussed there may be some concerns that the mechanisms of action or mechanisms of change might be different between different types of school. So there is a sort of small risk that if you do a study across multiple types of school, then you don't have the sample that's required sort of within looking at the different mechanisms in the different types of school. So we're not conclusive on this, but it may be better to focus in on one type of school rather than have a kind of split across several. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. A question from Jack. In relation to the outcomes of the projects, would projects with a focus on specific outcomes, e.g. tackling gender and sexuality-based bullying for strand 2, or LGBTQIA plus inclusive outcomes for strand 1 be considered, or would the training or intervention need to have a wider VAWG outcome?
Really good question. So we'd expect that all the programs that apply to us adhere to this statutory guidance on delivering RSHE in secondary schools, and that does include an expectation that young people are taught about things like same-sex relationships. In terms of the outcomes and the content, what it should be kind of geared towards, we'd generally expect this objective that it's geared towards a more broader set of outcomes rather than, say, just teachings around gender, around sexuality, around LGBT relationships and that kind of thing. So the outcomes of interest would be more things like attitudes around misogyny and gender roles and relationship behavior, accept healthy, respectful relationships, more so than a narrower focus on, say, LGBT relationships.
Thanks, Ben. I've got a question from Kate. When you say that you want a minimum of 4 sessions for strand 2, is there a minimum number of hours per school?
That's a good question. I think when we were picturing sessions, we were picturing kind of hour-long sessions, like a standard lesson timetable. I suppose there's no reason why schools have to follow that format. Maybe the way they deliver it by PSHE is a bit more in blocks. So I think, yeah, if you're proposing to deliver, say, 2 sessions of 2 hours each, I think that might be absolutely fine.
Thanks, Ben. I've got a question from Tash, I think might be for you, Phil. You mentioned the use of MADRA as a standardised measure of outcome. Do you have a list of other standardised measures that might be used?
Thanks, good question. We're just reviewing a number of measures at the moment, and we will make a sort of recommended shortlist.
Thanks. David, can one organisation apply for both strands? Is each strand valued 20k? I think 20k is about the co-design.
Yes, yeah, so absolutely, you can submit 2 separate applications, for one for strand 1 and one for strand 2. Please do just make it clear in your application, kind of up top when you're talking about your organisation, that that is what you're planning to do, and also whether you would have the capacity to deliver on both of those strands if awarded. And that's also something that we try and dig into with you a bit more at interview. But yes, absolutely, be very welcome to apply to both those strands. You'd also be, when we launch Objective 2, you'd be very welcome to apply for Objective 1 and Objective 2. We just need to consider with you your ability to meet the demands of both evaluations if you're awarded more than one project.
Thanks, Ben. A question from Anne. Please, can you clarify more about the funding offered at co-design stage? Is an automatic 20K issued up front? And is it additional to the budget that we propose for the project?
Yes. So for partners that enter into co-design, early on in that process, we'll, with the evaluator, give you an indication of the time that's required as part of that process. And then we'll ask you to to propose a budget to us on how much funding that would require to reimburse you for the staff time. That's up to a maximum of £20,000. You don't need to include that in the budget that you're proposing as part of the application process. That budget should be for setup and delivery of the intervention as part of the trial, and then co-design will be budgeted entirely separately. So feel free to just keep co-design out your mind when you're developing that budget.
Thanks, Ben. One other question. So the RSHE guidance is for primary schools too. What is the rationale for not including primary schools in this study?
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a lot, so if anyone else wants to jump in, please do feel free. So I think at YEF, we definitely recognise the strong role that primary schools take in supporting children and young people to grow up to have healthy and respectful relationships and healthy attitudes around gender and gender roles. For this objective, we are focusing only on secondary schools, and that's because we think that this is one really key area that we can focus on for the remainder of our endowment, and then have some really strong evidence at the end of it to give some really strong guidance to the sector about how to provide RSHE provision at a time when children and young people are starting to go on to start their first relationships and things like that. That's not to say that primary schools don't have a role in this and don't have an equal and as important role. It's just not where we're able to focus on within the time remaining for the fund.
I'm also happy to come in on this just to say, so there are 16,000 state-run primary schools in the UK, in England rather, they vary dramatically. I can't speak to great detail, but I'm working with number 10 at the moment on initiatives for primary school, because we are hearing a lot about misogyny in primary school, but there was a strong feeling that if we only had sort of a limited amount of funds and we're keen to get this up and running as soon as possible, then the sort of 3,500 secondary schools was the best place to start. And some of that is about a numbers game and a logistics game, but it's also about where these attitudes do develop and where we think we can have the most impact.
Thanks, Jo. Got a question for you, Jess. Applications need to be informed by the best evidence, but where can we find this evidence?
Great question. Sorry. On our website, there is the toolkit that I mentioned, which has the relationship violence prevention strand, where you can find a summary and also a longer technical report, which outlines all of the evidence that I shared a summary of in those 2 slides. And that's from the best available evidence about what we know works in relationship violence prevention education.
Thanks, Jess. Who answered your question, Vanna? A question from... Okay, this might be a question for you, Ben. Given that training needs and approaches are constantly evolving in response to needs, how much can the model that we applied for change ahead of implementation?
Good question. I think we do generally expect that interventions need to be quite well manualized and quite firmly embedded and stable before they're ready for an efficacy study. So you wouldn't want an intervention that's delivered across a year and a half, and then the interventions are quite different from at the start from what they do at the end. But that being said, like, there can be a little room for iteration and for building on any best evidence or guidance that's produced in the next 6 months. But for the purpose of this call and for the purpose of your application, we would expect that the intervention you propose will stay largely consistent until that setup period.
Got a question for you, Phil. Two questions, actually, so I'll just say the first one. So, are you expecting us to deliver the intervention to the control group after the study, just considering ethics?
Thanks. It's a good question and one we get asked a lot. Yes, generally doesn't favour some waitlist design. So what you're talking about is a waitlist design. So there's not a general preference to deliver the intervention to the control group schools afterwards.
Cool. And I think this is more just around timeline, but is there a timeline around delivering the initial intervention to the schools, e.g. what academic year? So for this, it would be, as outlined in the application guidance, we'd probably expect delivery to commence from September 2027, so the following academic year, not this one.
That's exactly right, yeah. And we would expect that interventions would end delivery no later than December 2028.
Oh, really good question, Eleanor. So I think it's probably an eligibility question. So do you have to have had much evaluation experience as an organisation? We historically have not undertaken evaluation to the scale needed here, but would we need to?
I can come in. It's not essential because we appoint independent evaluators. It is helpful to have some experience because then you know what to expect. You've been through some of the thought processes already, but don't stop it applying. Don't stop it from applying for you. Sorry, don't let that stop you applying for the call. Thank you.
Oh, good question, Helen. Question for maybe all of us, actually. For Strand 1, which may include teacher training, capacity building in schools, can you clarify if the evaluation and the RCT will focus on teachers rather than young people, as the intervention is directed at teachers?
I can make a start on that. Others come in. So what we've said is that the outcomes of the study should be at the child young person level, and the mechanisms by which you achieve those outcomes will be varied depending on the strand and the approaches you're taking. Ben, do you want to
add? Yeah, I think that basically covers it. Thanks, Phil. So the main outcomes we're interested in will be on the level of the child and young person. But that being said, we probably would also be interested, particularly for Strand 1, in a secondary outcome that looks at kind of maybe something like teacher self-efficacy, so how confident they feel in delivering the content after the intervention compared to a control group. But this is something we'll be able to confirm a bit more during co-design.
Thanks, Ben. Going up a question, who owns the IP of the content of stage 1? Correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, but I would assume the IP is owned by the organisation if it was created prior to the kind of awarding and the kind of contractual signing.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So anything that was developed before funding, that is entirely the IP of the applicant. But the Youth Endowment Fund would retain the kind of rights to the evaluation in its entirety. But the intervention would be absolutely your own, and that you'd be able to freely use the theory of change that was developed as part of co-design as well.
Thanks. Question for you, Jess, actually. What is the view on broadening the scope to all GBV rather than solely VAWG?
If I'm following the question correctly, what the question is around the outcomes of the funding and what we're looking to address through the healthy relationships education. Is that the question?
Sure, Kathy, do come back if we've misunderstood your question. We'll sort of maybe pause that until maybe Kathy comes back.
I wonder if the question is about whether we'd be open to programs which address things like violence from women to men or boys to girls, sorry, girls to boys, and also maybe gender-based violence that was around kind of like LGBT plus students. I think our general stance on this is that we understand that gender-based violence, and we know this from our CBV report and things like that, does kind of like to some extent cut across genders and cut across different types of children and young people, but we also recognize that most gender-based violence is committed by boys to girls, and so that's why this fits within a violence against women and girls strategy, and so that's why we're kind of putting the emphasis on this fund. But we do recognize that it can be wider than that. Is that about? I think that's about right, Jess.
Yeah, that sounds right. Joe, did you want to come in?
Yes, I was just going to say, I would encourage people to read the government's Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, maybe just the exec summary because it's very long. But I'm conscious that for some people, we've sort of laid out how this also does impact men and boys, and that will help people sort of understand the language that we're using around this, because we are aware, sort of particularly in LGBT relationships, that this comes up, but VAWG is the term we use. But I completely agree with everything that Jeff and Ben have said.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Ben. I've got another question. Can we work in different year groups in the same school, or do you want us to work across 20 schools and work with one year group?
Absolutely, you can work with different year groups within schools, as long as they're within that kind of 11 to 16 age range. So I think years 7 to 11. With our existing program of STEPS, for example, it's delivered to individual year groups. So there could be kind of a school with one year group who's receiving the content, one year group who isn't, and both of them are part of the trial. So yeah, we're absolutely open to a scope like that. It's just worth thinking in advance about kind of with the schools that you currently work with, what year group they currently generally deliver this content to, and making sure that it's working with that grain. But yeah, good question.
Budget question. I was waiting for these. Do you have a minimum and maximum ballpark in relation to the budget for setup and delivery?
We don't have a minimum and maximum budget. We'd really encourage applicants to propose to us the budget that they would need to deliver at the scale required. We tend to think that putting minimum and maximum budgets in these kind of guidance can result in some slightly perverse incentives of people thinking that they need to undercost the requirements of their intervention. For example, when we come to look at our proposal, we are trying to, our portfolio, we are trying to maximize the number of projects and evaluations that we can fund so we can really build the evidence base out as best we can. So we will slightly be thinking about value for money in that sense, in terms of obviously projects which have a higher budget envelope requirement might mean that we have to say no to something else. So that will come into our considerations. But we would really encourage you to just be completely upfront about the budget that you'd require to deliver to whatever it is, 20 to 30 schools within the timeframe.
Thanks, Ben. This is a good question. You mentioned being around from 9th to 20th August. I think it's around the interview stage. But this is the middle of school holiday, so how do we respond?
Yeah. It's definitely occurred to us that we're asking quite a lot of applicants during this process, and it is falling within the summer holidays, which I know isn't ideal for a lot of people. We are having to put these timelines in place really to make sure that we can deliver really high quality efficacy studies by 2029, when the Youth Endowment Fund's endowment ends. And that is meaning we're having to kind of go with a bit of a truncated application and assessment process. And so we recognize that this is requiring a lot of people to keep time reserved in quite short timeframes. So yeah, we just say thank you very much for people's support with this.
Got a question from Aoife. How many schools and teachers are expected to work under Strand 1? Good question.
Really good question. I think we don't have a firm view on this. We'd really welcome applicants' own proposals based on their prior delivery experience. We can imagine supporting applications where they're delivering this content only to the teachers of RSHE provision, potentially as part of regular PSHE lessons. But we'd also be open to interventions which are training a broader range of teachers within a school on the content.
Let me just add to that. I think consider this the theory of change for your intervention. So you need to be delivering to the right stakeholders in order to see at the end of the day the changes in attitude, for example, of the pupils. So that's the way to work out whether you think you're targeting the right people, is to review the theory of change.
We've got another question. Here's the question. What are the common reasons applications fail at shortlisting? What mistakes should we avoid?
Good question. Great to hear from you, Phil. I think one thing I maybe sometimes find is that there's what we really value, especially when we're thinking about whether interventions are ready for efficacy studies, is real like clarity in description. So kind of like really being core on what the program is, what the activities are, how it's expected to lead to the final outcomes. And we recognize that that's not always what's expected from other funders. So other funders might be expecting you to sell them a bit more on the effectiveness of your program. We're here basically to see whether the program is effective. And so what we value maybe a bit more than other funders is really just that clarity of description, to be like, yes, we can see what you're doing. We can see how it can be evaluated, more so than necessarily, even though we'd like you to talk about how you're drawing on existing evidence around implementation and things, you don't necessarily need to sell us on kind of the effectiveness of your intervention just yet. That's kind of a big difference with maybe other funders. It's a really good question. Phil, would you want to add anything?
Let me add one or two things. I mean, I think coming across that you understand, obviously you understand what you're talking about, and you can clearly explain the mechanisms by which you think you're going to achieve the outcomes. So that's such a big bonus. If you can explain, this is the problem we're addressing, this is how we're doing it, this is why we're doing it this way, and this is backed up with a bit of prior evidence about why we think it could be effective. Maybe there's a couple of other things. Poor budgeting. We want to see something which just makes sense to us. Sometimes organisations do propose to scale in a much bigger size project than we think they're probably really able to do. So sort of overemphasising how big you could scale within a very short time frame can be problematic. Just looking at my notes here. Yeah, I think those are probably some of the major ones.
Great, thanks both. Is it possible to work with just specific geography with this disadvantage of the application, or is a national reach preferable?
Not at all. So you'd be very welcome to, if you've got really strong networks and links within one region, so whether that's the northwest of England, for example, or within kind of a couple of particular counties, you'd be very welcome to apply on that basis. You would just need to think about how many schools, secondary schools, are available to recruit into the trial in that area, and what proportion of those you would need to be able to kind of get in. Because if you need to deliver to 30 schools, for example, and then recruit another 30 to make up the whole trial between the intervention and control groups of 60 schools altogether, and the areas you work in only have 80 secondary schools, then that would mean you'd have to recruit a high number of them, and it could introduce a bit of risk if you were able to. But just to say, like, having really good local geographic links is just as much a positive as having maybe slightly weaker but national relationships to schools.
Thanks, Ben. Same question for you, Phil. Can you clarify if intervention and control groups can be in the same school? I'm sure this has to do with the unit randomization, but yeah, happy for you to clarify.
Thanks. So it depends on the study design. If you have a school randomized design, then a whole school will only be in the intervention arm or in the control arm. We expect that most of the projects in strand 1 will be a school randomized design. Maybe there's some designs which could be different, but the majority we expect to be school randomized. In strand 2, we think there's a bit more opportunity for in-school randomization, where you might have a year, like the STEPS project, where you might have a year group that's in the intervention arm and a year group that's in the control arm. it depends a bit on your exact proposal, what your project's going to do, the strand. Yeah, so that's the broad picture. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that does.
Sorry, I'll just clarify something I said as well. I mentioned about the total number of schools to recruit. And just to clarify that, if you were delivering to 20 schools, then you'd need to recruit 40 schools because they'll be randomized equally to intervention control group. So just to really clarify for everyone that schools are randomized. So you're not recruiting schools to be in the intervention group and recruiting schools to be in the control group. You're recruiting a total number of schools to take part in the trial, and then they'll be randomized between intervention control. Just wanted to make sure that I wasn't confusing anyone there.
Thanks, Ben. I've got another question. We often rely on partnerships for schools. They're not always reliable due to constraints in timing and staffing. Can DfE help with promoting this work in schools? Which I think, Joe, you mentioned you would be able to help. We already have a number of connections in schools. Can we use these for the programme?
So just to say, DfE would help, but obviously DfE are very much not the experts in this. We're the experts in schools. So we wouldn't want to interfere with any sort of randomization. So whilst we could promote things, there isn't a guarantee that the school would get that intervention due to the fact that we do need an RCT. DfE does have a lot of sort of newsletters and things, and we are here to help. But I just don't want anyone to make any promises to schools about things that we can't deliver on.
Question from Dawn. For Strand 1 training, are you looking specifically at specific methods of upskilling teachers, or are you also looking at delivery resources that support teacher delivery? I'd say both, but yeah.
So I think on Strand 1, we'd expect for most or all interventions, there'd be a really significant teacher training component, but that can also be supplemented with whole school approaches. If I've understood the question right, in terms of resource development, I think developing resources would probably be out of scope for this call because we're looking to test existing interventions. It kind of depends on what would be included within that resource bucket. If it was kind of like posters, literature, awareness materials that you would disseminate around the school, I think that could be included as a minor component of the intervention. But definitely, we would generally consider the focus of it to be teacher training.
Do come back to us, Dawn, if we haven't answered your question. I got a question from Julia. Just to clarify, do you expect a theory of change, an established theory of change, to be in place at the point of application submission, or can this be worked on during kind of co-design?
I can add, thanks. Yeah, we do expect a theory of change. It may not be the strongest or most developed theory of change, but we do expect a theory of change because it's important that we can see your understanding about how you actually make the change happens that you're aiming for. But the co-design period is a period where you get some more support from the evaluators to strengthen and refine the theory of change.
Thanks, Phil. I would just add to that slightly and just say that we're not asking people to definitely provide us with an attachment theory of change with their application. If you've got one available, then please do send it across. It'll definitely help us to see that. But I guess what we're most interested in terms of a theory of change at this stage is, can you articulate why you think your intervention is going to lead to the required outcomes? And great if that's in a kind of formal diagram of a theory of change that you can attach to the application, but also if that's only within the kind of text of the application form itself, that's also absolutely fine.
Thanks, Ben. Ben, I think you answered this already, but just to clarify, is this more for organisations working on a more national level as opposed to a local authority working in one area?
Yeah, so you can definitely work on a regional level. We will be looking at the strength of networks when we assess applications, and that can be strength of networks nationally or strength of networks regionally. I think if you were only operating in one local authority area, you'd probably struggle to meet the scale requirements for this evaluation. But if you're working with a combination of local authorities and you can demonstrate that there are sufficient schools there that can meet the scale requirements that you have good relationships with, then that would put you in good stead to clear that assessment criteria.
I hope that answered your question, David. I've got a question from Trish. Is this for schools to apply for, or are schools recruited by the partners?
So schools will be recruited by the partners from kind of late in the co-design period and early in the setup period. If you are interested in being a school for the trial and you are happy with being either in the intervention group or the control group, so that's just maybe what I'd say at this point, is just that if you are interested in joining us with any of the projects that we end up awarding, then you would join the trial, and then there'd be an equal chance for you to be allocated to the intervention group, which would receive the intervention, and the control group who would not receive the intervention and continue to deliver whatever services they would outside of the trial. So you need to be happy with both outcomes in order to join any of the trials. And if you were, not to get too into detail, but if you were in the control group, you would be we would encourage evaluators to award some kind of incentive for and reimbursement for participating in things like data collection activities. If you would really like to be part of this, then please do email into the grants inbox, and we can make a note of the name of your school and your email address, so that when we come later down the line to working with partners to identify the regions for delivery, we can encourage them to reach out to you.
Thanks. Vicky, sorry for going back to this question, but I still don't think it's clear in my mind. With Strand 2, if we need to deliver to 20 to 30 schools, can you confirm we are expected to deliver to a 4-year group, which is likely 6 classes per school, on what could be a 12-week program? I just want to make sure we look at what's achievable. I think that's
sorry, Phil, do you want to...
I can come in. So with this is Strand 2. So we're talking about universal provision, which means that you don't select the young people based on characteristics, or but at the same time, I think it's not. I mean, others, please correct me. It's not essential that you provide a service to a whole year, or the whole school. It can be it could be at a smaller level, a smaller group level. Ben, is that your understanding as well? Thanks.
Yeah, that sounds exactly right. Thanks, Bill.
Great. Sorry, I'm just checking the list again.
We have a couple of hands up of people who didn't want to type a question. I just noticed, Lisa, you had a question.
Yes.
Is she able to unmute?
I think because of the just the security settings of the webinar, we might not be able to bring those people through to. Actually, I guess Yanina, sorry, I know you're out on the call sorting out the tech. I wonder if you wouldn't mind just unmuting Lisa.
Hi, yeah, they have permissions now. They can just turn their camera and mic on.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So Lisa, would you like to come in? Not to worry. Maybe we'll give you a second, Lisa. Joe, would you like to?
Joe?
Hi, yes, thank you. I'm sorry, I can't access the question and answer function. That's why I've had my hand up. I don't know why. I think I've got my Teams account isn't fully functioning. I actually have a couple of questions. First one about the randomization and the schools that don't get selected to participate in the intervention. There was a question earlier about whether there would be a requirement to deliver our intervention at a later date for those schools. And I think, Phil, you said there wasn't. But are we able to, if we want to, and if we can secure the funding to do that?
Thanks for the question. We don't encourage it as part of the studies. So we wouldn't be encouraging it for you to do that as part of the study. I mean, what you do after the study is finished is not within our our business. But yeah, so does that answer your question?
I think so, yes, thank you. And my second question, sorry, I'm being greedy. Partnerships, you talked about developing partnerships, and I know in the guidance it talks about if you are in a partnership that you that each partner delivers the same intervention. Is that correct? So you couldn't go in a partnership with another organisation that is delivering a different type of around healthy relationships, but it's a different type of intervention to the one that you're doing. So there could be a comparison between our organisation and another organisation within the evaluation.
Okay, I can take this. Yeah, it's a good question. So generally, no, it wouldn't work that way. If you're in partnership, you might have a combined delivery model. You might be delivering two different components within one package to the same school. You could work that way, but you wouldn't sort of deliver one thing in one school and deliver something else in a different school, and then have more schools which are control schools. So we're trying to keep, because these things are already complicated, we're trying to keep them so simple to an intervention and a business as usual comparison.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That answers my question. Great. Thank you very much.
Right. Just going to move us along because we've got 2 minutes left, so apologies for rushing us. But I just wanted to close by talking through the next steps. So in terms of the timeline, as we've all mentioned, the application closes Monday, 27th July at 9 AM. So please do submit your applications to our grants inbox. Applicants will then be informed whether or not they've been shortlisted by kind of early August time. For those who have been shortlisted, interviews will take place throughout August. So yeah, I know some of you won't be available, so please do, if you are shortlisted, do let us know who will be able to kind of take over. Once interviews are completed, we'd expect to kind of let applicants know in September time whether or not they've received the initial approval to kind of move into the co-design phase. And that phase is where you'll work more intensely with the evaluator, with the independent evaluator. So during that time, we'll probably match you with an evaluator and you'll work with them intensely for about 2 months, October to November, to kind of develop a final project plan, a final evaluation plan, and a final budget. Final funding decisions will take place in December, so just before the Christmas break, with projects likely to commence from January 2027 up until December 2028. So this is more of an estimate to kind of help with your planning, but we likely expect recruitment to take place between Jan to July, with delivery sort of starting from September, could be later, depending on your model, up until the latest, which is December 2028. So that's something to keep in mind. December should end by 2028. So just making sure you keep that in mind when you are working through your application and your budget planning. I think that's it from us. Just wanted to mention all of this is in the application guidance in much more detail, so please do have a look at that before you start your application. I think that brings us to a close. Thank you everyone for attending. I appreciate we weren't able to get through all the questions, but I'm hoping we got through most of them. We're hoping to kind of collate all the questions, probably group them into themes and submit a more refreshed FAQ for you all to read. We'll also be publishing the recordings and the slides on our website in the next few days, so do look out for that if you want to revisit anything that happened today. And yeah, if you have any more urgent questions that you think we weren't able to answer today, but you need urgently responded to, please do email us at our grants inbox, and we'll hope to respond within hopefully 1 to 2 working days. Great, I think that's it from us. Thank you everyone for attending, and yeah, best of luck with your applications.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thanks, Medoza.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.